Hey, good morning. We'll wait for Lee Shruti. John Michael's going to be a little bit late. He'll join us about 10 minutes after, but I'll get us kicked off as soon as Shruti joins.
Good morning.
Perfect. Hello.
How are you doing this morning, Ari?
Oh, I just woke up. I'm out here in Seattle, um, but it was better than yesterday. Today's 8 a.m. Kickoff. Yesterday was 6 a.m. So I
Yeah,
just have to
I
get
hear
used to
you.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, my yesterday started at 7:30 and ended up being almost a 10-hour day. So, and then I woke up at 4:30. I'm Eastern, but then I woke up at 4:30 and it was just couldn't go back to sleep. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, yesterday I started my day in East Coast and I ended my day in Malaysia and Singapore. So I was 6 a.m. to 5:30 p.m.
I hear you. Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. I picked up Asia. I had a Asia Europe, so that always has to happen in those early hours to get them both together on a call.
Oh,
So,
that's hard. Yeah.
yeah. All sounds like fun and games until you're trying to schedule it,
Yeah, it's almost impossible from the West Coast.
I'm
Um,
sure. I'm sure.
yeah.
I have a hard enough time trying to do most people in the US with Europe and Asia and it not being just horrific for somebody. So at least right now I've moved over to East Coast and that makes it a little bit easier to catch most people, but
Yeah.
it's a thing, that's for sure. Hi, Leslie. Good morning.
Hello, nice to meet you. Good morning.
My pleasure.
Well, I'll go ahead and get kicked off. I was expecting Shruti to join, and John Michael again will join in a few minutes. This is OCP um, carbon accounting for circularity. And the first thing I have to announce is later, sometime in July, I work for Seagate Technology, and I should probably go ahead and throw that in my thing. So we're often the first or second hard drive manufacturer, depending on quarter in the world. There are three of us, Western Digital, Toshiba. Um, and we also sell SSDs. John Michael's more in tune to the SSD market. And I can easily say that every year we have over 200 million drives that are decommissioned. The vast majority, mostly for security reasons, the vast majority are destroyed or otherwise disposed of. And of those 200 million plus devices, almost all of them have usable life left, especially in the types of workloads that we see on the secondhand market. There are places in the world where up to 70%, I'll use Indonesia because I have some data from there, around 70% of the hard drives, for example, and I believe it's true for SSDs as well, are what we call white box. So there is we do know that there are numbers of drives. Seagate sells about 1.3 million used drives a year. We think that number might be closer to in the low tens of millions. It's just a guesstimate on my part. And honestly, given there are some like ITAD vendors who do a very good job of data sanitization, and do like for hard drives, do a sanitize overwrite, or in cases where drives support crypto erase, do a crypto erase, which is a higher standard. And I can go into great detail on. I did at the OCP Global Summit on data sanitization deep dive. But and for SSDs, it's usually a cryptographic erase, but they also support block erase. But when we talk to major partners, cryptographic erase is the way forward. Now and I talked to all the major CSPs, all the major OEMs, and I've given my spiel many times, tier one, tier two, you name it. the fear around loss of data and the potential costs around that are huge. Morgan Stanley, one of their iTads, just shipped a bunch of drives. They were never stolen or the data was never exposed. But just the fact that they had shipped them from their data center unsanitized and they were found just like laying around in a warehouse by an auditor. I believe that their penalty to the U.S. government was, I forget the exact number, it was in the tens of millions, 30 or 50 million, something like that. I talked to one of the folks who was more involved with it, and they said their total cost was well over $100 million. Given what they had to, how they had to explain this to their customers, and so it is extremely sensitive. The people who work with the federal government, for example, they go as far as to making sure that you can't take a device, tear it apart in a very, very advanced laboratory environment, a single device, and somehow get data off that, but either by putting it on a spin stand or by trying to scrape keys out of the sock, silicon. So that's a standard that has kept. And then there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially from some of the iTAD vendors, where they just believe things they've read in the internet type of conversations. Those are hard, and then there's some who are very well informed. So the one incentive that's really popped up for us time and time again is, the concept of carbon credits, and that's because these big companies have, everyone has a P&L, and carbon is now part of that P&L. It's a profit and loss center, and as soon as we mention carbon credits, and we've been probably started talking about this too early, about 2 years ago, we get a ton of interest. And if you look at the carbon related goals, moonshot goals, most companies call them, we do at Seagate. They all have carbon emissions in there, renewable energies in there, sometimes recycled materials or zero waste is in there. So as soon as we start talking in the language of carbon credits, like I said, security and data sanitization is the biggest barrier, but the biggest incentive we run into has been not the fact that they can resell their devices for a certain number of dollars per terabyte, depending on the device and the demand. But the bigger incentive for many of the big CSPs would be, hey, can we actually get carbon credits back? And let's use the example of a typical hard drive. And again, John Michael's more on the SSD side, I'm more on the hard drive side. Of something like, the embodied carbon in that drive might be something like 10 kilos, 10 kilograms. And by one study, it's like 5.5 kilograms of that can be recovered. I think that's a little bit high. But if you look at a drive that has, say, a 5 to 7 year lifespan, and it replaces what would be a new drive being sold into this what we call a white box market or a secondary market, and some of these markets are quite robust. Then if those 5.5 kilograms of carbon can be divided, or my idea is to incentivize the seller, because that's the hardest barrier. But it could also be split between the seller and the buyer. So when someone's buying these drives, they aren't taking on the full carbon cost of that drive. So that's a debate we're having even internally at Seagate, but I can influence that. So we hope to have a lot more information when the paper comes out. And Shruti was just able to join. So Shruti, I'm going through what you've heard a lot already, and that is that a couple $100 million drives a year are disposed of, most are destroyed, and there's a lot of and Microsoft's one of these companies, but there's a lot of interest in carbon credits, and folks' P&Ls now are not just around dollars and cents, but they're also looking at carbon. And I talked about a lot of the moonshot goals that companies have.
Right.
And with that, with that, I think I've done my spiel, and John Michael should be starting soon. But I really started off with the incentive, the massive waste in the industry, and I can't stress that enough. If 200 million drives with usable life left are just going into a landfill after 5 to 7 years, and that's there's a market for those drives. That's something we can impact. And there are two prongs to this. One, as I mentioned, is security, and we're working with OCP now, and we're finally getting interest from the security folks at OCP with different programs like the SAFE. There's a program called SAFE, which is a program where they have a single set of standards for auditing data sanitization security on hard drives and hard drive security in general. And SSDs as well. I'd say if anything, they've been more focused on SSDs, but they're reaching out to us now. And the goal is to get to a level of confidence across the industry. And I'll quote something that Brian Kelly told us. If you were at a couple months ago, he spoke to the monthly meeting we have for OCP sustainability. And he said that if one company gets it wrong, it tars us all, because from a big customer's perspective, you can't go out and audit every single storage vendor you have, especially when you look across the SSDs, the 3 HDD vendors. You're talking about mountains of work and uncertainty. So they're really trying to standardize with a focus on cryptographic arrays. And so that's another big part of this. Last year, I gave 2 talks at OCP. One was on total cost of carbon accounting, which I gave to the sustainability group. But I went to the security group to talk about a deep dive on HDD sanitization, and gave the same spiel. And a lot of the folks on the security side were not aware of the sustainability impact of storage devices. And the waste that's involved. So that was good. And I'm almost finding this year I'm going to talk to the storage group and the security group again, depending on whether my talks are accepted. Because when I talk to the sustainability group, it's kind of kumbaya. We all have the same story. It's a different set of decision makers. And when I look throughout at the folks we talk to when we have business discussions and procurement discussions with big companies, they are often very disconnected from the sustainability folks. And I'd say even to a certain extent from the security folks, although we see a bit more collaboration. So these are very big companies that can be compartmentalized. So one of our strategies is also to have a broader influence and to get to the decision makers at the P&L level. And it looks like we had Shruti and we lost her. And John Michael has not joined yet, but at this point, I've been talking a lot. I'll go ahead and stop and see if you guys have any questions or things you'd like to bring up.
Well, I would certainly, I have an easy question. I would love to know, is it possible to get a copy of your talk on the total cost of carbon accounting? I would absolutely love to read that, and whatever else you're willing to share. I'm not sure if we have that or not.
Yeah, yes, what I'll do is I'll send out after this meeting, and I'll probably put in the chat as well. All the OCP talks are available
Oh,
for the
fabulous.
last couple of years. I have YouTube Premium. I'm not sure if you have to have Premium for this, but there's an OCP channel. And I often just, like, at night, if I don't want to watch TV, but I don't want to do work, I sometimes just kind of go through the OCP talks and see if there's anything there of interest, because it is a barometer for, I think, some of the biggest decision makers are out there. They see OCP as a place to have influence, as do we here at Seagate.
True.
And I mean, there's you have to kind of pick through the weeds, but sometimes there's some things being said there that are extremely valuable and influential. And I do look at some of the, I often look at the companies who are presenting. There's some who are really just trying to sell something, or sell a perspective, and there are others who are what I call thought leaders. And a good example, on Shuri dropped off, so she won't hear this, but a good example would be, say, Microsoft.
Right.
And others. Meta is one of the founders of OCP. Google's there. Major OEMs are there. If you're into AI, NVIDIA is there. I mean, it's depending on what your perspective is, you'll find some really good nuggets there. But I'll go ahead and send that out, and you'll get is you get a PDF of the presentation, and you'll also be able to watch it. They
Great.
tend to be about 20 minutes long. And I think I'll just send the one on total cost of carbon ownership. That was at the very end of the day. I think it was the last talk. So it became more of an open discussion, but it has a lot of the points I just spoke to in those 20 minutes.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear the discussion. I think I mean, we're all sort of preaching to the choir. Again, this whole question of incentivizing and at the same time helping to get to a better place with sanitization and not errorful events in handling that and being able to handle that circularity moment. It's the crux of it, but there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of I'm not sure, honestly, and I'd be interested in your assessment. Is there a shift over time, even small shift over time, in how people are discussing and the willingness to discuss sanitization that might show us some movement in this positive direction? Because I really feel like the rhetorical moment, the language and power moment on this is one of the major hurdles.
It is, and the comparison I make. Let's see, wow, 12 years ago, I was working for Microsoft. I spent 18 years at Microsoft, and I was told that I was on the kernel team, and the team I owned, we owned the boot environment. So the fact that when your computer boots and you don't see that BIOS screen, for those of us who, we're kind of dating some of us, but used to be,
That's okay, I'm right there
you
with
could
you, brother.
start your computer and then go get a cup of coffee, come back, and maybe you're at the
If you
lobby.
didn't have to keep putting in the discs, you mean?
Yeah, that's even further back. Yeah.
I'm that old. That was the end of my college where we could actually do that. So
Yeah. So there's something called, and we used to be what we called legacy BIOS mode, where you get that black screen and then you press F2 or F12 to do whatever, and then you get this kind of ugly flash, and then Windows will start booting, or Linux will start booting. And so what we did was we looked at there was a modern OS like firmware standard called UEFI, which was back then new. And my job, and I spent 4.5 months mostly in Asia traveling that year, was to evangelize UEFI, working with all the major industry partners. Gave a big talk on it. And we got to what more beautiful, but also more secure. And that was the first introduction of secure boot, where somebody couldn't take your computer and physically insert what we call a boot kit very early in the process, because first in, you own everything, right? And now and over time, that has expanded to devices. For years, it's Seagate and others. We have actually secure boot, so you couldn't take a hard drive, do something to it physically, put it back in the ecosystem, and then you own any computer that puts in that hard drive. Really scary stuff.
Yep.
Cyber crime is estimated to be a $3 trillion a year industry. It's larger than the GDP of, I think, most nations in the world. And somebody has a better quote on that. I can't remember it off the top of my head. So these are very real threats, and that's before you even get to things like nation state threats. So the industry has, like, where people were barely in the HDD side, the servers didn't even adopt UEFI immediately. We forced the rest of the industry through the Windows requirements program, the WICL program at that time. I think it's now called the HCK, the Hardware Certification Kit. So we basically, if you didn't do UEFI, you didn't get your discount for Windows, which would destroy your business model. We were able to convince the entire client industry to move. I talked to the server folks, and they were very conservative, and they were hemming, and a couple of years later, they all adopted too, because their customers started asking for it.
Sure.
So I think when I look at what happened with security 12 years ago, where we're at that moment, unfortunately. So I think we're a decade away from really solving this. I'd love to be, and it has to go hand in hand with security.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
if you look at last year's OCP Global Summit security talks, and I'll point out a couple of those as well when I send out an email.
Thank you.
Very well done, given by some of the biggest players. I know it was Microsoft and Google. I think it was a couple other companies too, big names like HPE probably. And they're really saying, for us to get there, they're now for the first time talking about circularity being important to them. I think from the board level down, they're starting, and that's really the other point. There's us squeaky wheels down here on the ground, the Circular Drive Initiative and stuff, but we're starting to get influence from the board level down and
That's
through
good.
executives. So it's like a pincer movement, but I do think it's going to take time. We're seeing small increases in the number of drives that we resell at Seagate every year, but it's not the trend I would hope for. It's positive, but it's 1.3 million drives or something that was last year that we have records for, which is great, but it's a drop in the bucket.
So where in the decision tree in the industry have you seen really I'll just say a stalwart moment? If we're seeing it from the board, we see it from below. I mean, we know customers are interested in and will choose who they either travel with or purchase from, and the whole corporate sustainability aspect is important to the customer, whether that be retail or business or in some cases government. So I'm just sort of wondering, from the inside, given your time and expertise and also connections, where are you seeing the biggest challenges in this adoption level?
I mean, I can't stress enough that data sanitization security.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
but
the thought. Yeah, I mean, you could see that you could see $1 billion. These companies are so big, you could see an overnight $1 billion drop in the stock price and their valuation if there was a major event.
Absolutely.
So again, nobody wants to get fired. Nobody wants to be that company that gets in the news. So that's been the major fear point. And that's still dominant, broadly dominant. Where we are seeing some hope, though, is, for example, there are data centers that don't have any sensitive user data. They do a lot of caching and stuff. And we see there's a different tiering of data. And we talk about tiering for performance, for example, because hard drives get bigger. We're shipping 30 terabyte hard drives now. As they get bigger, the IOPS per terabyte, the number of IOs you can process per terabyte, drops. And to deal with that, you can add more SSDs to certain tiers of or smaller hard drives even, to tiers that need the IOPS. But there are other tiers where you don't need that. So we see more data tiering on the performance side to deal with this big problem of bigger hard drives that are slower on a per IOPS per terabyte level. We're also starting to see that with security, with folks looking at what drives they have, what data is on those drives. And there are some big companies now who are and some are working with us, some are working with ITAD vendors to say, hey, if we do a basic purge level sanitization on these devices, we're okay with them leaving the walls of the data center and being resold. So we are starting to see that. It's a trickle.
Yeah, but I
but
mean, what we
boy,
need is a habit to get formed.
Yeah.
And with that, the more success moments should beget an increased appetite for what's going on and trust in the system. Let me just, I know Hippie, you have your hand, but if I could just close this point real quick. Because as you're saying, it's the question, and I mean, I'm very, very aware, very sensitive to the cybersecurity aspect. Sorry, that's part of my 4:30 a.m. moment there. But yet at the same time, you'd said there is increasing pressure from the board, or at least awareness or discussion from the board. So, and of course, the board is going to be immediately sensitive to, the risks involved for stock deprecation and so forth. So that's where I'm wondering, are there certain groups, are there certain audiences within the corporation who are particularly more entrenched on the safe side, on the risk averse side? Or is it, you really can't pinpoint an audience within an organization?
Yeah, I would say that, it's the security folks who are the most risk averse.
Okay.
They own a good example would be the speaker who came and spoke to us, and I hope we recorded that. I'll have to check, which was Brian Kelly, who owns Azure hardware security at Microsoft. So he's one of the co-chairs of the security group. So
Okay.
there's someone who's at what Microsoft would say is a partner level, which would be, a VP in most companies. And very influential within Azure, which is the major group that we're working with. And he's the one who is risk averse, but he's also the one who spent probably a good part of a year plus after we started banging the drums at some of the groups I'm in. Includes standards groups like IEEE 2883, which is for data sanitization. And I'm a member of that group. John Michael's the co-chair, and I'm a member of the Circular Drive Initiative.
Yep.
And there's some other groups out there too that relate to this. So we're and what's interesting is those groups have a lot of storage folks in them, and CDI does do a little better job of having broader influence. But when I go to IEEE, it's mostly just storage vendors in those groups.
Okay.
But it's a good group of people with and most have like decades, sometimes in some cases of only data security type experience. So it's a very deep well in those groups, very technical.
Sure. But with that also rife for habits and positions and
yeah, within the storage industry, I think we're fairly aligned. It's our biggest customers. I could list off 10, but you probably know the 10.
Absolutely.
And they're for two reasons. One is it's just such a volume of drives go through those companies. The second point to that would be they're influential. So when I mentioned there's some circularity programs going on with big customers, here's the thing: they will not talk about it. I cannot give you a name.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm less concerned about the name. What I'm trying to do is really sort of probe to understand the ethnographic landscape. That's my end game here, is to sort of understand what different audiences, rhetorical positions are. I mean, I understand, like, my father was old school, informatics officer for State Department. I grew up around all of this stuff. I mean, and I'm old. So I'm keenly aware of, and obviously, security out the orifices.
Yeah.
But I also know from all the conversations, all of the everything, that there are the nuances in the positions and the rhetoric among different groups opens the potential, if we're able to tap into that, for where those toggle moments get and how to help evolve the discourse. Does that make sense? That's what my line of questioning is around, because yeah.
Yeah, I know it's excellent. It's actually excellent question. And it's one of the reasons, and I probably about a year and a half ago started becoming more acutely aware of that. And earlier when I talked about me going at OCP and not talking this year, I don't have a sustainability talk, even though this all sounds like sustainability information I can share. But I'll be going talking to the storage folks and the security folks, because that's where I get the stronger reactions. And that's where I get the people saying, "Oh, we did, this is new to us. This is really, really important." And then I'm hoping that I'm getting more voices that go up the chain. So I am thinking of, how do I reach out to different groups? So but I don't have like probably we're a big vendor, but we do only talk to certain parts of the company.
Absolutely.
And getting the more we can get a better understanding of how to have those influences. And I think anything in the press is helpful. So for example, we did announce, I think a week ago or so, we announced an eBay store for selling Seagate drives.
Okay.
So that's the type of little things we're doing to try and get more mind share.
Exactly. Perfect word.
And some of the statements I made earlier, we are trying to look for more and more ways to get to the right decision makers, to get to the influence level. We have succeeded to some point. The fact that there are 3 new security initiatives or implementations that came out of OCP last year, or either came out or were announced. And one's focused on auditing, which I said that's a safe program. Another is focused on how basically the hardware that has what we call the root of trust, that handles what we call the secure boot and attestation.
Right.
They want to standardize that. We have a very mature model at Seagate, but we're certainly looking at what they're doing. It's nobody wants to adopt a 1.0, but but as that matures, we'll take a harder look at it. And then there's another one for managing the keys, because if you lose a key, secure boot doesn't matter.
Right.
And so how you manage and protect your keys is super important.
Absolutely.
And that's both at the device level, but also at how you create the keys and secure the private key, which signs all other keys, right? So that's there are standards around this, including these devices we call HSMs, hardware security modules, that are air gapped from the system. It takes 2 people to operate one. I wrote a white paper 12 years ago that's now been archived, but that was when I was at Microsoft. I wrote an archive on how to use these devices, because even the manufacturers didn't have very good instructions. Hopefully that's changed and Microsoft doesn't have to keep that paper going. But and we've, in my days, I've even gone and audited companies to see how they're doing this. And at the federal level, even you can even get to the point of there's a specification, a federal specification on rooms with man traps.
Yep.
Where you're even able to get into the room, the door closes behind you and you're trapped inside. That's how silly it gets. But and that's been around for over a decade. So I may have digressed a little bit from your point, but
no, it's all pertinent. It is. It is.
And I see, Smith. That's Smith University.
Oh,
I see it there on the side.
I was just in a conversation regarding our learning and development side. So I didn't
Yeah.
change my background
Oh,
between
no, I like it.
meetings.
It's helpful. I need that myself because I always have to rename myself as Seagate because not everybody knows who I am. And
Yeah,
now,
so it should just be the Smith one, but I've been in L&D meetings all day, so.
yeah. So, getting, and I was in a conversation this week with Carnegie Mellon, for example. So we are starting to reach out more to academia because
Okay.
that's probably when I talk about pincer movements, I talk about hitting different audiences.
Mhm.
Academia could be a big lever for us,
Exactly,
you know.
yeah, I'm a recovering academic, so before my
Okay,
time
there we
at
go.
Smith, I was, yeah,
Yeah.
professor of linguistic anthropology, so
Oh, wow. Yeah.
worked on
My
sustainability of communities, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I was despite my profession, I was an English major, and I think my only academic was teaching university students in English in Japan.
Yeah,
Um,
okay.
so not the same thing, but
No, but still, the classroom, the research. Absolutely. But I know HIPAA has been so patient. I've usurped so much of the time.
awesome. Um, Shruti,
Oh,
No, sorry. Hiba has a hand up. That's what Lisa meant.
yeah.
She has a hand up for a question. So I'll let her go.
okay.
Thank you for sharing the amazing work that Seagate has been doing and you've been doing with OCP. I had a couple of questions. First thing first, I did study policy and data analytics at Carnegie Mellon University, so good to know that you're working with them.
Perfect segue.
It's a great university, very focused on research and also on like sustainability and the policy side of things. So a bit of introduction. I'm an intern at Smith. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. In my past life, I was with the IMF. So the policy person in me has been jumping with a lot of questions around circularity and like resale of used products. And I just wanted to know if you've come across any of these topics and what your opinions are on this. So since I haven't done specific research within the hard drive industry, I have, however, looked at other industries and how reused products are sold. And my question is, have you thought about regulations around these secondary markets? Because that's one of the major issue with other used products like cars and so on. There are not a lot of regulations there. There's not a lot of standardization. A lot of these used products are less efficient, specifically in terms of emissions. They actually, because they require more maintenance and that the parts are old, they actually emit more in their use phase within the second life. And then the fact that it's an issue that we come across often because I was working with emerging markets like Vietnam. There's this mindset where inferior products are sold in such markets, which is not looked upon favorably. So I was wondering if you've looked at that and like how do you ensure product standards and product quality when you basically introduce them in the secondary market?
So that's an outstanding question. So at Seagate, we've modeled ourselves after the Toyota certified, resale market. Whereas if you buy, and I when I was younger, I bought a certified Toyota. I was very happy with it. So when we take drives that we resell, like say the drives we'll be reselling through the eBay store, which I don't know if Shruti heard that, but we just announced that recently. We actually take those drives, we take them of all places, we send them all to Vietnam because we have a remanufacturing center there where we a lot. I've talked to the ITAD community and they look at like this little smart logs they can find on a drive and they make poor assumptions based on data they find there. And some of those assumptions are over a decade old. But we build the drives. So when we take our own drives, we can look at the drive intensively. We completely rewrite all the tracks on the drive, and about 30% of the drives we receive back, we recycle because they don't meet our standards. Another 10% we resell as white box, and about 60% we'll recertify and give a 2-year warranty on those drives. So it's a great program. We need to get more, and it's one reason we're working with eBay now. We need to get more mind share around that, because we looked at those markets like Vietnam, where let's say 70% of the drives are what we call white box. They're just resold used drives that come from other parts of the world usually. end up in those markets where they're sold more cheaply. And one big concern would be if they're really looking for, and a lot of these drives are used for different purposes, you know, from chia farming to or cryptocurrency farming to you know, somebody's garage or, you know, home, to actually being used in a pseudo data center type environment for an enterprise or small business, small to medium business. So I don't have enough visibility into exactly what that is. I will say this, the power consumption and the embodied carbon in a 10 terabyte drive versus the 30 terabyte drives we're selling today on a per drive basis is about the same. If we look at our life cycle assessments, it actually is better today, but some of that's just better reporting where we've, you know, ISO certified more of our vendors and that type of thing. So let's put that aside and just say that would make a modern drive often 3 times more, you know, carbon emission efficient than the drive that's being sold in that secondary market, which is more likely to be today like a 6 to 10 to 12, you know, terabyte drive. So that's a legitimate concern, and I think it should be a factor we look at. But the fact is those drives are being sold today, and there's a huge demand. And the other thing is at least the drive's being reused, so we're saving that 5 kilograms that would be lost if it was just destroyed. And then you have to look at what's the source of the energy being used. And that's an equation. That's a really good question. That's an equation I haven't done yet. And I think it's more of a question for tomorrow than today. You know, today it's secondary. There are drives being sold that if I were, and I talked about that $3 trillion a year cybercrime economy that's out there. If I were a cyber criminal, I might just go to Vietnam and start buying drives and see which ones were simply, you know, formatted via Windows or something like that where I can recover the data off those drives and start using that in a criminal organization. So I'm hoping I'm not giving any of you ideas here, but seriously, I have qualms with. I don't know often how these drives are being, if they're meeting the purge standard that we've set in IEEE 2883, the data sanitization standard, the international one, or if they're not. You know, I've talked to ITAD vendors, and we talk about the level of waste. Most drives, a lot of drives are not being recycled, or if so, they're only being recycled for, say, aluminum or steel. I talked to one ITAD vendor who has 18 trucks, and these are big, you know, big 18-wheeler trucks, backs them up to the walls of data centers, and at the very back of the truck, as the drives leave the walls of the data center, they're put through a shredder and shredded to a 2 millimeter by 2 millimeter particle, which is the NIST, which is the NSA standard, for example. It's the government standard for data destruction. Believe it or not, if that data is not encrypted, you can take that tiny shred and get something like 10 Encyclopedia Britannicas worth of data. Now, it might not be contiguous, it might not be useful, but we consider that even not completely secure. But then they dispose of or otherwise, you know, get rid of that. And I've talked to the ITAD CEO who owns those trucks, and then later I talked to the company that sells them the shredding machines. So it's really, you know, there is a balance here. I would rather, you know, I think we should do that calculation, and understand, you know, if there is an enormous, like, say, power impact. The thing is though, you look at these markets, they're not going to spend money on new drives. It's simply not going to happen. So while I think it's a good question, I think we still have a long ways to go before we have to worry about that being a problem. You know, if you were to see these drives, you know, and that's a problem for us economically at Seagate, right? I have sales folks who are concerned about us reselling too many drives or encouraging this too much because they think it might eat into their sales and their goals and quotas. But I have very strong messaging from the top that it's in our DNA as a company, and we're not going to stop worrying about sustainability and circularity. And that comes from the CEO, and my management team all the way up. So on my side, fortunately, I don't report into the sales organization. I can be as aggressive as I want to be, and we're going to continue to be aggressive. And that's one of the reasons I work for Seagate, to tell you the truth, and have this job. I love it. Shruti.
Yeah, I was going to add a couple of things, not about Seagate, because I know less about the nice work culture about Seagate, but about the previous points that Ari was making. So one thing that I wanted to make sure that you folks have, gotten grounded on is that the circularity work over here that we are discussing, that is actually not just HDDs and not just storage. I know what is one thing that will happen is JM is a lot into storage, Ari is, I am also. So if we are, unintentionally sort of giving you all storage examples, I just want to make sure that you folks know that we are actually talking about circularity of all data center devices, essentially. When you say carbon accounting, it's for reuse of any of the data center devices. And at that point, some things might vary. Like Ari was saying, for the HDDs, 10 terabyte versus a 30 terabyte, the embodied carbon and operational carbon might be, very, very similar. But in some devices, it might not. Like in SSDs, it might not actually. So just keep in mind when you folks are, going through all of that. And also about the rules and regulations, right? And Ari can add what he thinks. My personal read is that we are like a step behind that. We are sort of trying to give incentives so folks see that this is beneficial to do. And when this is seen as beneficial to do, folks will want to give attention to setting rules and regulations around it. So we are sort of one step behind setting the rules and regulations. We are trying to make sure that folks can get incentive out of doing it on both the sides. The folks who are giving the, giving the device for a second life, as well as folks who are using it for a second life, both are able to see some incentive. So just, if you can, just those 2 points, if we can ground on that. And from your perspective, like if you want to, I was wondering if you want to like throw out random questions. I want to make sure that you get exposure to more folks outside of just, JM, me, and Ari, outside of this work stream. So if there are, particular questions brewing in your mind, we can, have you speak to other people in OCP sustainability also. So, you can get broader views and, non-storage views maybe at that point. So if you have random questions, like, I don't know if you would want to jot it down as a list and send that, hey, these are the questions we are thinking about. And I can start trying to connect you folks with, some people who can talk about it. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And, to support what Shruti just said, I'll put it in the chat, but I'll also send it out in email. The 2023 OCP Regional Summit back in, I think, October of last year. There were a number of sustainability talks in that track. And again, one of my talks was in the security track, but that's probably less interesting to you. So, got the wrong event. So I'll send that out in a little bit. But again, pick through it. Most of the talks are only 20 minutes long, but you'll find in Shruti, I believe you were in at least 2 of those talks.
Right. Yeah.
So there's some really good information there. Yeah, October 17th, and that's a big event, probably one of our biggest events of the year, and certainly for sustainability it is. Here we go. And I don't know if any of you are able to attend in San Jose, but that's a really amazing event where you can network with so many people. And I see the networking as being, pretty much as important as everything else.
Mhm.
So let me go ahead right now. Boy, I'm not very good at Zoom. Apparently, there's a chat.
But Trudy, absolutely, in terms of the continued connection, I know, this is we're still only like less than a month in with Vanessa and Hiba and just still trying to formulate questions and formulate everything. And we've had a few internal meetings this week. And I think, in the coming weeks, probably after the holiday week, next week is holiday. Yeah. It's like in this time warp, I feel. But after the holiday week, right, ladies, my expectation is that, it's, as I always say, it's hard to ask questions about something you don't know about because it's really terribly difficult to formulate that question when you don't know. But I think that, as more begins to coalesce for them, absolutely. And it's a very generous offer and we'll certainly be taking you up on it. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And if you feel like you are, too early to ask questions, there is absolutely no problem if the question is very generic. Like, don't worry about being able to form good questions or complete questions kind of thing. I mean, at max, I will probably just write a paragraph from my side instead of connecting you folks if I see that, oh, this is something that I can explain. So all good news will come out of it, hopefully. So.
Yeah, it's helpful to get questions from folks who aren't in the same mind bubble as some of us. And that's one reason I talked about, why I've been focusing more on not talking to the sustainability group anymore, because I get very different perspective when I go and talk to the storage people or the security people or the data center people. And that, if I don't go out and talk to those folks, I don't get those different perspectives. And I say academia is another, lever that we could use more. I'm just realizing now I should have invited the Carnegie Mellon folks I've been talking to because we're talking on the same topics to this. So it's great to get these perspectives. And again, I put it in the chat, but I'll send it an email afterwards. The OCP Global Summit videos and presentations from last year. We could probably, Shruti, I don't know if we want to include the regional summit and other data there as well, but you can, once you're on the OCP site, you can start going through past events and navigating for talks that are of interest to you. You'll see broader perspectives, and a lot of talks have the word sustainability in the name that aren't in the same sustainability track. For example, there's a lot of information around immersion cooling. Because cooling is such an energy draw. And, Holland, they have data centers where the data centers actually heat the greenhouses above them. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, across many different groups in OCP, and a lot of it comes to OCP. So OCP is a great attractor of diverse thoughts, but mostly inside the tech community.
And maybe another thing, now this might help to narrow down. When you say sustainability work, yeah, even things like, say heat reuse, etc., that is all still sustainability work, or, what kind of cooling is deployed, that still impacts sustainability work. This work stream was more focusing on reuse of devices. So carbon accounting related to reuse of devices. So if you just look at sustainability, you'll find a lot broader aspects. Like I said, heat reuse, something to do with, water or cooling and stuff like that, which is great to know. But if you want to narrow down, that will not directly, I think, that will not directly impact what you are working on.
Yeah. Even things like safe, low waste nuclear power. I haven't seen that at OCP yet. I kind of hope to see it this year or soon. But there's, I've been hearing that come into more and more conversations, just because renewable energy is it's really a must have if we're going to dramatically reduce energy use in the world, or carbon emissions from energy use in the world.
I mean, when we talk about that, the next, moment that comes to mind, and perhaps I'm veering us afield, but it does relate to my prior line of questioning, looking at what are the triggers that will move discussion and move the habit of particular rhetorical and just processual positions, is the question of the impact of AI. And with that, as you
Ooh.
said, the draw of energy, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like,
Yeah.
you say there's 10 years, but perhaps, I'm always interested in the multidimensional moment at which other variables come in and affect, a social system, in this case, a socioeconomic system, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because we have the positions, we have thoughts, we have this, and then we have the, economic as well as then the engineering aspects to it. But, tweak something in any of them and
Yeah.
change
You're
habits. So
you're bringing up which is a great point. I'd say like even a year ago, I would talk about how most people don't understand how big the role of storage is in the data center as far as energy consumption and even total cost of ownership, let alone total cost of carbon ownership. That has changed dramatically, especially when you look at embodied carbon, but also power usage. These new GPUs, one thing I find frustrating is the semiconductor industry is very reticent to publish carbon emissions data in their LCAs. It's just and anything we can do to solve that problem, because we, at least if we knew, we can address it, but you can't fight what you can't see. So that's a frustration. And yeah, we are seeing, I would have said 2 years ago that storage might be one of the biggest factors in reaching sustainability in the data center, and I don't know if that's true anymore.
Mhm.
And I don't think it would be if we started looking at embodied carbon, although SSDs also have quite a bit of embodied carbon.
Mhm.
And you'll probably get hit by this question, like when you're talking about, how the carbon should be allocated, folks will probably talk about how that carbon is measured, first of all, or assessed,
Yeah.
not really measured, but estimated. And it's true that, the carbon assessment techniques are not all standardized, right? In the industry, there's a lot of variation. Like one thing that I would suggest is, because there is in parallel work we are trying to do, trying to kick off to help that standardization. Not just us, but even in other industry forums are trying to sort of establish standardization around having the carbon estimation. So in your work, like when you get hit by these questions, I would suggest you can, refer to that and say that assuming that work takes fruit, then we are sort of working on what would be layered on top of that. That is, now you have the carbon estimate. Now let's talk about how it is going to be allocated. So assuming that work will take fruit.
Okay.
Yeah. So otherwise, folks will just get held up on that prior question that, hey, what is that total carbon? But this, but that. So.
True.
Yeah, and for example, that's one reason it's taking us so long. And Shruti, we should be publishing a white paper next month on carbon accounting from Seagate.
Oh, okay.
We're working with the GHG protocol, greenhouse gas protocol folks, and other standards organizations, so that when we publish something, we hope that, and that will really help. I think the work we've been doing for 2 years at Seagate will springboard this effort. We were hoping to have the paper out the end of this month, but I think it's pushed to next month. And unfortunately, our director of sustainability, Belong, who Shruti knows, he's in Penang, Malaysia. So again, we started this conversation talking about time zone issues, and we're probably a couple hours too late to have any chance of getting on the call.
And the publication of that, will that be through?
That'll be through Seagate, although Shruti, we can discuss whether we want to also publish that through OCP and what that would look like as a contribution.
OCP always encourages any company who wants to contribute. their work to
Yeah.
OCP.
So I'm the OCP advocate within Seagate, so I'll do what I can.
Great. I look forward to that.
All right. So we've gone through the hour.
Fine. Yeah. I just looked up, I was like, oh, because we have a CDI meeting now.
That's right. So let's kick over to
we
that.
Probably need to jump. Yep.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks,
both
everybody.
so much for your time. Truly.
Yeah.
Thank
If you have any questions, I'll send an email. Feel free to reach out.
Thank
Yes,
you.
please
Thank
feel
you
free to
both.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. See you in
Bye.
the
See you soon.
Yeah.